Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs and welcome back to the Minecraft Survival Guide. I hope you're all having a good day. In today's episode, we're back over here at the Windy City and we're actually going to start turning it into a city. Today, I would like to take an extensive look at the process of planning a city. And it's going to be a long process building this, so as you know, Rome wasn't built in a day. We are not going to be building too much today. What we're going to be doing is laying the foundations for a city that will take shape gradually over the course of many weeks and months. And let's be real, you folks at home probably aren't the kind of folks like me who have hours and hours each week to spend in Minecraft. If you're looking at maybe spending 1 or 2 hours a week maybe in Minecraft, then this is going to feel like a large project. But I am hoping that some of these lessons are things that you can take into even small projects if you want to design a space long term, turn it into a village or a town, or even over a long enough period of time, a city. The first thing we're going to do is go and grab a bunch of materials that we're going to use for city planning, because I plan on setting up a variety of little footprints for buildings, basically like little hollow squares on the ground where we can plan where city buildings are going to go. And if we get a little bit further along in the process, we can start turning those into wireframes so that we can get an idea of the scale. And from there, we basically got to look at our city's skyline, and we can get a feel for the shape of the area without using too many resources, without committing and building stuff that has a ton of detail. We can already decide whether we like the shape of the city or if we need to change something up. So the first thing we're going to do is actually fly out to a mesa biome that I know is a lot further south from here. We're headed out to the Badlands, and we're going to acquire a lot of terracotta, because my plan here is to build these foundational footprints with colored terracotta for a few reasons. Welcome to the Badlands biome. I'm going to designate this my mining Badlands. Lots of nice plateau that we can get dug into here. And the cool thing about the Badlands is if we want to get hold of a bunch of terracotta, we only need haste 1 and efficiency 5 as a combination. So we can set up a smaller beacon somewhere like here, where there's a nice thick layer of both natural terracotta and a couple of the colors. And even though we only need haste 1, so we only need a single tier of a beacon, I'm going to set up a 2-tier beacon, if only because every tier of beacon gives you an extra 10 blocks of range for the beacon effect. So if we throw down this beacon on here, activate that for haste, we'll get a 30 block range, I think, from a 2-tier beacon, and then 40 from a tier 3 and 50 from a tier 4, but I don't think we'll need a full 50 blocks worth of range to get a bunch of terracotta out of the corner of this mesa. So with the haste beacon set up, there we go, we are in business, stripping the terracotta out of this Badlands. So once again, why terracotta? Well, you're actually looking at one of the reasons right now. Terracotta is an easy material to gather in bulk, and it's also quite easy to tear down this way. So I'll set up a beacon somewhere central to the area that I'm building in the city, and if I don't like the shape of something, I can very easily tear it down in a matter of seconds, even if the wireframe or the temporary walls for the build are quite large. Secondly, terracotta is available in a variety of colors, so if I want to, I can kind of color code some of the buildings as we go. It's also available in a lot of warm colors, and I actually want to use a lot of a warmer color palette in the builds that we do over at the Windy City. It's going to have some interesting contrasts between these kind of warmer orangey reds and the cooler blues, because I want it to feel industrial and use a bunch of terracotta and copper and these kind of warmer things. But then copper is also going to gradually age over time. It's going to oxidize and turn bluer, and so then we can start working in things like warped wood and prismarine as a contrast. So I'm already starting to puzzle through the color theory of these builds, and I think terracotta is going to be a nice thing to have around so that I can have that warm element in the landscape already. Last of all, in other circumstances, I would probably want to build some of these wireframes out of stone, since I already have a lot of it and I wouldn't really need to go and get a whole bunch more in a mining operation like this. But the fact is, I've already used a lot of stone for the terraforming and landscaping around that area, so I would much rather use something that's going to stand out against what I've already built, so I don't accidentally start tearing down one of my own landscaped cliffs. So consider this terracotta part sort of optional for your own endeavors, but consider what's going to make the most sense for you when you're starting to lay out your city. I can obviously harvest a lot of wood, and I gather wood pretty regularly on my live streams, but in Java Edition you can't insta-mine wood even with a haste 2 beacon and efficiency 5, so it's actually kind of difficult using wood because it takes a while to take back down if you decide you want to reshape something. Some people like to use colorful wool for wireframing their builds, and while I think that's a really cool idea and you can insta-mine wool with just efficiency 5 shears, shears don't have a great deal of durability. There's nothing that really replaces shears, and even with unbreaking, they're not going to last all that long. With all that said, other materials might suggest themselves to you as ideal to use, and if you've got any tips like that, leave them in the comments. I've got a decent amount of terracotta in this shulker box already, so I'm going to continue harvesting this between clips, and I'll see you back at the Windy City so we can begin our planning process. Okay, welcome back. I've got myself a bunch of the different colors of terracotta, along with a full shulker of regular terracotta that we could dye if we wanted to, or we can just stick to the colors that we got here, which are all in the warmer palette, the kind of stuff that you're going to pull directly out of a Badlands. You're not going to find blues and greens over there, but you're going to find the warmer colors. And I've already got a few shulker boxes here of some of the other materials I plan on incorporating into this stuff, but to be honest, right now, it's mostly the stuff that I've been dealing with building these giant fans out of. We got some wind charges. I've actually brought a bunch of the tough bricks that we got from the trial chamber dig as well, because I imagine we'll use a fair amount of those in the construction of this city, especially to expand the brick palette and make the bricks of the city look a little different to the stone that is being used as part of the cliff side around it. So we're going to start shaping out some of the buildings here. I think one of the earliest projects that I want to take on is at least figure out the footprint of the station building over here. So we're going to grab, I think, maybe some red terracotta. I've already used red as part of the mangrove stuff over here, but I think red is just one of those things I associate with stations for some reason. So I think we're going to start using red for some of this. We'll obviously keep it within the range where it's not going to cover up this fan, since that's what we're going to use to get onto the balcony of the station building. But I think we're going to start building around here, and it's going to be possible to measure out from the central line of the monorail here where we want this building to go. I'm imagining a big archway that the monorail actually kind of explodes out of, allowing you to get a sense of how fast you're going as you travel out into the city beyond, and also feel like it's part of the arch design of the monorail viaduct as well. It's going to kind of allow you to get a shape language going on, this kind of thematic thing of arches around here. I think is going to be really fun to work with. So disregarding the central block that was there, I've counted out 11 blocks along this side. I think that's actually perfect. I think that's where we're going to have the balcony and forecourt of the station built out. That's going to go all the way up to the cliffs here. It's probably going to go on top of the cliffs a little bit as well, so we're going to hide some of the work that we have done there, but once again, maybe we can shape some of the stuff down here. This doesn't have to be the absolute flat floor of the build as well. Like, we can shape all of this into archways and stuff later, and even have some areas that run underneath the station for like pedestrian travel and vehicle travel that's not part of the monorail. But I like the idea of there being this big building here that's very obvious and can be spotted from a distance. For the sake of simplicity right now, I'm going to count out 11 blocks on the opposite side as well, so we can make the building somewhat symmetrical. I think it's always good to set some sort of symmetry about buildings like this, because you might want to repeat patterns, you might want to make sure that the roof design is identical on both sides, and it just helps a little bit with the building process if you can give yourself some easy stuff to do later. Obviously right now there's a bit of terrain here that we might end up getting rid of later, but that is where that 11 block strip ends, and that can go around like so into the cliffside there, and that's going to form the outer perimeter wall of the building. But from that point on, we can get a little creative. Maybe there's a little ticket office right here in front of the cliff where tickets are going to be sold before you can step on the fan and jump up to the station to grab your train. So I'm going to switch to a different color just to give myself the idea that this is a different sort of building. We'll keep it in the warmer family though. We'll keep orange terracotta around here, and let's make a little ticket booth, I don't know, maybe 11 or so blocks long, which sounds like a lot, but honestly, if you've got a couple of ticket booths here, if you've got a couple of people selling stuff, there might be room for 3 or 4 of them in there. I can see that being okay. Maybe we'll make those villagers. It would be kind of fun to incorporate villagers into the actual town later. And that's 7 blocks long, and then it kind of curves around to the back there. Maybe there can be a little back entrance to the ticket office, you know, the staff-only door can go there, that kind of thing. Yeah, so you'll notice as I'm doing this, I'm mostly working with odd numbers. I'm counting 11s and 7s pretty often, and that is often the case with building because it's easier to create a pointed roof and something that feels like it, you know, comes to a peak if you have an odd number, so that the central block of that odd number can always be the peak of the roof. Sometimes if you get a 2-block wide roof, it looks a little bit odd when the roof sort of flattens out towards the top. So a lot of the time you'll see builders working with odd numbers when they're planning out builds like this. And so around here we're going to have a central kind of station plaza. That's where the big fan is going to go. We'll organize some stuff around this, but I think this is going to be relatively clear of buildings because we want to have this nice and open. But of course around the outside side here, and this is where we're going to switch to yet another color of terracotta. Maybe we'll go with yellow for this. There's probably going to be little shops and kiosks, little tourist traps, the kind of stuff that people are going to want to buy right before they board a train to leave, or maybe board a train to go around the rest of the city. Perhaps a little information booth, perhaps a little market stall, something like that. So maybe we'll put some of those on diagonals, which is a bit of a risky move, especially as we're building on a slightly different scale here, but you know what, I think we'll give it a try. I might have to figure out how exactly the ground around here flattens, if it's all going to be at this height and we just need to bring the walls of that down, or obviously there's going to be archways in it, so we don't need to worry as much. But where's the floor is the question we need to be asking ourselves while we design this. I want to add a shop right here as well, but I also don't want to crowd the entrances to the big fan, because of course we're only really going to be able to come at it from this direction or from over in this direction, so I don't want to really crowd my way through. I want the city to feel really fluid to walk around, and so in that case we're going to maybe bring the shop idea back here instead of right here, and I think it's going to feel a little bit more at home tucked away over here next to this diagonal kiosk. This could just be a little newspaper stand or something like that, but either way, it's small enough that it's not going to block what we're working with over here. Although, you know what I'd love to do? I would love this to be a newspaper stand that actually has an apartment over the top of it and a little house kind of section out the back. So I'm going to take terracotta, just basic terracotta. This is going to be the building block for most of the residential footprint that we're going to leave around here, and we're just going to leave that around the back here. And imagine that somebody has a house around the back which is going to actually go over the top of the newspaper stand, and for that we're actually going to build up into a wireframe of sorts here, just to remind me that that's what I want to do with this. This is a great way to start imagining a story for this area as well. Like, do the people who live in this house also run the newspaper stand down here? Is it a villager who could maybe come from the house up there and then come down here to work? Maybe a cartography table could be their workstation, and they'd travel down and meet the cartography table right here, and that's where they could be ready to, you know, serve some newspapers or maybe some maps that could take you out to a trial chamber nearby or something. Either way, I've already established that I want to work with vertical space in this town, and so I think it's going to be really fun to imagine shops over the top of shops, and maybe something starting on the ground level but building up above that later, as though throughout the city's history people started on the ground and then had to build higher and higher in order to create more space for houses and other things. I think I'm actually going to dip into the black concrete box here, since I don't have any black terracotta, and black terracotta isn't quite going to look the way I want it to, because I want to use black concrete to lay out where the roads are going to go. We're probably not going to use black concrete for the roads, since while it does look like modern asphalt, I don't think the technology level of the city here is really going to be that modern. I don't think they're necessarily going to be using like blacktop for all of their roads. I think we'll at least use this to indicate space between buildings, and I want to have a fairly wide thoroughfare through here, the kind of thing that, you know, people could travel on horse and cart and that kind of thing, and allow them to get to this station forecourt area. I want to make the road maybe 7 blocks wide, so I think maybe we'll leave at least 1 block on either side for a pavement of some kind, and then after that, right here is where we'll start building other things like shops and houses. But I imagine from a commercial perspective, this station row here is going to be prime real estate, so you can imagine people wanting to have shops here. There might be some fairly prestigious stuff gathered around the transport hub for the area. We could have a shop here selling fashionable clothes, maybe like the latest armor trims are in here if we wanted to keep it within the world of Minecraft. Then maybe the next shop over could be a pastry shop. We could have cake and cookies in the window, and then the next one over could be books, because there's so many books in Minecraft. We could have enchanted books, lecterns on display, that kind of thing. You could do a lot with that. If you want to even just create the facades with a little shop window and not have them be full interiors, that's something you could manage. And you know what? Just so this road has a bit more of a dynamic to it, we can actually move some of the exteriors of the shops back by 1. We'll create this little indented pattern here, and I think this shop in the center is going to have to be the bakery. It can't really have an upstairs because the monorail is going to be driving right over the top of it. We'll start carving away the terrain here as well to make room for the road, but after a few shops on this side, I think we're probably going to leave a little gap here. Maybe only make it 3 blocks wide. That's a little like pedestrian street that we can go on down, and that actually lines up really nicely with the exterior of this giant fan, which is going to be part of a much larger, I think maybe even civic building. So I think for civic infrastructure, we'll maybe switch to the red terracotta. I'll start marking that out right here, and that's going to line up with the mangrove that I've already used to build over here. So already, from just those few short ideas, we've started to put together a colorful outline of the buildings around where I'm planning the station. And our goal here is going to be to go around and do a bunch more of this, planning where some of these buildings are going to go, maybe color coding it a little bit for civic buildings and their related outbuildings, for shops, and for residential area. Plus roads as well, if we can figure out exactly where those are going to go, but we can always shift this stuff around later. That's the reason we're building this outline and not just starting somewhere and building a fully realized build, is that this planning process can really help us decide things like scale and how everything's going to fit together instead of just creating a series of isolated buildings. We're planning everything from the ground up all at once, which might seem kind of overwhelming, and trust me, it is, which is one of the reasons it's taken me a while to really get started on this project, but trust me, I think I know where we're going with this now. So I'm going to spend a bit more time placing some of these blocks, and when we come back, I'll talk you through what I've done and talk you through some of the principles I think are really important when you're planning a city on this kind of scale. Hey folks, welcome back. As you can see, our city outline is starting to take shape, and I've got a couple of things I want to go over here. I've got a couple of principles that we are trying our best to follow, and things that we might adhere to whilst we are building up the rest of this, because these are outlines really just for a first draft. They're not necessarily going to be exactly where we build everything, but I wanted to at least get some stuff down here so we can figure out the feel of this city and figure out what's next in terms of building. I've started putting in the trail of the rest of the monorail system. Since it's going to be supported by a couple of buildings, I felt like I didn't need to build any more archways until we got over here where it kind of straddles a road, and I like the fact that we have an archway here that kind of disappears behind a building. It sort of encourages you to explore and figure out what else is beyond here. The thing to remember when you're building up something like this, especially if you've done some landscaping beforehand like I have, you're going to be killing your darlings a little bit. You're going to be covering up stuff that you were probably very proud of with buildings and stuff in the foreground, and you're only going to be able to see your previous work when you get up real close to it, like when you end up in this alleyway between the two buildings that leads to the fan here, which we might end up repositioning because it doesn't really feel central to this space anymore. But I've been doing this for long enough that the copper around here that I unwaxed is actually starting to age. So that's a pretty good sign that we need to pause and reflect on what we're doing here. And I want to share a few principles that I'm thinking about when it comes to city planning. First, let's talk about scale. First of all, your instinct when you build in Minecraft is going to be to build with player scale, and often because those are the tools that Minecraft gives you. If you take a look at a 2x1 doorway here, that is the size of a door that you can make out of wood. If it's not a double door, then it's probably a single door and only has this 2x1 shape. And that usually makes sense for when you want to build something that feels like real life, because doors are typically single doors. You know, I have a single door into my house, I don't have a double door that leads to my house, but the door is a little bit larger than it feels walking through this doorway. Like, I'm not cramped in on either side when I have a door like this leading through to my house. It doesn't, my head doesn't graze the top of the frame. But if you consider the size of that door and then you scale everything else from real life designs down to match the scale of Minecraft, builds are going to feel kind of small, and you won't be able to pack in as much detail considering that this house is only about 9 blocks wide. And it might seem strange building something larger than player scale because of the door situation, the fact that you're going to have to dress up a door with, you know, trapdoors and stuff around it, and some of those parts are going to be interactable, and so you think, why am I building something that's larger than a standard door that the player can walk through? It sort of removes some of the practicality of that. But there are a few things to consider here. First of all, the player moves around 4 to 5 meters per second, depending on whether you're walking or sprinting, which is about 3 times faster than the typical human walking speed, which is about 1.5 meters per second. If you walk 4 to 5 meters per second, you're an Olympic power walker. You're probably close to sprinting for most people. So as you travel through an environment of 1 meter thick blocks, you don't really get the same sense of scale that you would if everything around you in real life was a meter thick. Consider walls, for example, like the walls that we're making out of solid building blocks here. These are 1 meter thick walls, which is about 3 times the thickness of the brick walls of my house. So I would honestly consider 1 meter thick to be a little excessive for building in real life, but considering how quickly you pass through doorways and stuff in Minecraft, it's about the same time as it takes you to pass through a door in real life for a wall that is much thinner. So with that in mind, if you considered scaling up your build to roughly twice or 3 times the size you instinctively build at, you're going to move away from player scale builds when it comes to the look of the doorways and maybe windows and stuff like that. It's going to seem a little bit larger than life, but you're leaving enough room for detail, and it doesn't actually take you much longer to get around them than it would your real-life house. So the first draft of a lot of these places has come in at player scale, really. I'm looking at a 7-block wide interior for what I'm thinking of as like a brownstone New York-style apartment, and I'm honestly not certain if I'm happy with that as the scale. We might end up expanding this, but I've given myself room to expand because there are, I think, about 6 or 7 different apartments on this row, and we could probably eat into 2 of these and expand the size of them, but then we'd potentially have to move them around so we don't lose the alleyway that leads up to that fan over here and this second row of houses there. But there are definitely ways around that. One way could be to start the actual apartments higher up so that we can still leave room for a city street level walkway through here, potentially build over the top of that, or even create a central courtyard where the houses themselves, the apartments, might end up being a little larger and starting a little higher up so that they can have a bit more space on the inside, but on the outside this could open out into a kind of courtyard area as a shared communal space for the people who live in the apartment. There's plenty of examples of stuff like that happening in urban architecture, so we could draw some inspiration from that and make it happen. As you approach your first draft of a city project like this, you've got to consider a lot of these outlines malleable. They've got to be changeable for later, because as you're setting some of these things down and figuring out where roads are going to go, you might like one element, but ultimately be not so satisfied with some of the others. The second thing I want to talk about is angles, because real-life houses aren't built on a perfect north, south, east, west grid. Even cities that are built on a grid, like a lot of major cities in the United States, don't conform to cardinal directions. They might have angled houses on corner plots. They might have odd-shaped buildings just because the architect wanted to create a certain impression. So if you want to create a dynamic-feeling city, you may want to have some buildings built on an angle. In order to inspire that a little bit, because I find once you start building on a grid, it's a little harder to break out of that, I've gone over here, separate from where I was planning the roads, and started a completely separate set of houses. And over here there are several which are built on the grid, but there is one, this corner one here, which is not. And this one even comes up a hill, so I was thinking about having a street entrance here, but then have an exit down there at a kind of cellar/basement or foundation level where it comes out into the remainder of these cluster of houses, and they have a bit more shared communal space, maybe gardens around them. And this can feel like perhaps an older part of the city that's had to give way to some of the smaller, tighter, high-rise buildings towards the center where the transport hubs are. But this house here is intentionally built on an angle. I've created these 5-block long strips of material and positioned those so that they indent by 1 block. Those are the longer side walls, and I've set them up in 5-block panels so we can get a bit more detail out of each of them, but the end walls here are 3-block sections, so they're at a slightly different angle. If you're creating a dynamic feeling city, you probably want some buildings to be built on angles like this, and in my experience, there's a couple of different ways you can do it. You can either set an angle for the side walls but leave the end walls flat, or you set an angle for both the end and the side walls. The most important thing is that if you want an easier time later, you need to stick to the same scale on both. So for example, this is 4 sections of 5-block wide strips of terracotta, right? So we have 4 effectively panels of the wall of this house on this side, and I've done exactly the same thing on this side once I've figured out the length of the end wall. So the overall impression is that we have a regular shape that's just been tilted ever so slightly, and we're going to turn this into a proper house a little bit later. I've even added a more geometric, more cardinal directions section here, which is going to be a chimney. The inside of the house is probably going to have a stone fireplace with a nice big hearth, and I figured we might as well make a chimney that is square on to the rest of the grid whilst contrasting the rest of this build, and it kind of gives a bit more dynamic to the build to do that. I've also created a couple of angled builds here where I've started to angle the roads slightly. I figured sooner or later the roads are not going to all be straight, and I wanted to make the city more interesting than just having everything on a flat grid. And so as the road bends this way, this house is bending slightly to match that. And also I shortened up the back wall here to accommodate the fact that the monorail viaduct is going to be traveling past or possibly even through part of this house. In other places, the houses themselves aren't angled, but the aspect of the exterior kind of is, because I'm considering each of these individual apartments, and this one is inset 1 block back from the others either side. This one comes forward, and once again, the road starts to angle. On the corner here, I've even made a semicircular building, and I'm not entirely certain what this is going to be yet, but there are lots of different buildings, lots of different shapes in real life, so I'm sure we can take inspiration from a semicircular building that exists somewhere in the world. A third principle for city design, and something that I think hits fairly close to home for me, is considering shared walls. In the UK, we have a lot of houses that are clustered together in a smaller space. Even my house shares a wall with our neighbor's house, creating a semi-detached house, or a duplex, if you're familiar with that term in the United States. One thing that helps a city feel more realistic is having some buildings sharing walls, so they don't all have gaps and alleyways between them. It feels unusual in Minecraft when you want to make a feature out of every building, but in Minecraft, just like in real life, doing this saves materials, saves space, and creates variety. I think the only place where you're going to run up against a little bit of friction is delineating where the boundary of one building versus the next is, and then on the interior, you have to make sure that if your wall is only 1 block thick, you're going to share a material that makes sense for both buildings, and those could be very different color palettes, so it can be a hard time choosing whether you want a wall to be made out of birch planks for one house next door when the other house next door doesn't really suit the birch planks as an interior wall material. But a lot of these apartments that we're building here, I'm thinking of as New York brownstones, these are going to be pretty similar in their architecture, so I think we can create a shared wall between each of these that has the same sort of character, and it shouldn't be too bad. I've also clustered together some of the shops on these rows in the same way, and there are probably going to be some apartments or, little maisonettes above those, so we'll see what comes out of them. But I think having shared walls, especially in a city area like this, is important. It starts to create a feeling of a city block instead of just having alleyways and detached houses everywhere. And this is another reason to lay out foundations like this beforehand, because shared walls also means things like shared roofs, and if you build a complete house before you start on the one next to it, you're not going to want to modify the roof as much because you're already happy with the roof section, and so if you add on a house to the side, it can kind of feel like you are having to mess with something that you've already perfected, and that can be a difficult thing to handle. I've done stuff like that in the past and really felt like I missed an opportunity to create multiple houses at the same time and have them share a roof space. Fourth, looking at the bigger picture here, you need to consider the purpose of a lot of these areas. Like, any city is going to have a lot of residential buildings, which are homes for people. It'll also have businesses for goods and services, one or more central industries that the town is built around, and then civic buildings where a lot of the planning goes in. Or maybe like the station over here, they provide transport connections or, amenities, public utilities, stuff like that. A lot of towns in the north of England are industrial towns with mines that provided coal and metals, or factories that produce steel or created clothes, and so that's what I'm thinking of this building as being, some sort of central industry. And as I was discussing earlier with the terracotta, I have tried my best to outline each of these types of buildings in a different material so I can be clear about their purpose later. Around the central hub of the train station, there are going to be a lot of shops, a lot of goods and services sold here so that they can be taken from here and shipped out to other places, or people can grab stuff when they're on their commute to work or whatever else it happens to be. But then further out, I've started to think about city apartments and residential districts of a town, some of which might have occasional shops dotted around here and there, but a lot of people are going to be coming into a central area of town to do their shopping and then returning to their homes. Obviously, this feels very truncated for the size that a city really is in the real world, so you would not have necessarily as many residential buildings so close to the center of town. People would typically live further out where they can get out into green spaces a lot more easily, but I'm planning a little bit of green space around here as well. But it can be quite easy in Minecraft to create an area where it feels like there are just shops but nowhere for people to actually live, and by the same token, it can feel very easy to create some kind of sleepy village or town where there are a bunch of personal homes, but nowhere for them to go and shop. So as you're creating these buildings, consider, where do people live? Where do these people get essential items like food, clothes? Do they all work in these small shops, or do they work in larger factories? And what other needs do they have outside of that? Do you want to include things like parks so that people can go for a walk in a natural space? Do you want to consider public utilities, like how they get electricity and water and other things to their homes? Do you want to build something like a hospital so that people could receive medical care? There are so many different aspects of real life, a lot of which we take for granted because we are just living in the world and trying to not think about all of this stuff every day. But all of this is useful for project planning in Minecraft, not just because it creates a more realistic simulation of a real-life city and adds a sense of realism or completeness to your project. It also provides inspiration for what to build. If you're a little bit stuck on, what exactly you want to build in an area, consider the needs of its people. Consider, in the fiction of the world, what do these people actually want? And fifth and finally, I guess, leave notes for yourself. So building a town or a city is a big project, and like I said earlier, I still want this to apply for folks who don't have as much time to play Minecraft as I do. So people who are only going to be logging in for an hour a day or a couple of hours a week. You'll probably want to leave yourself notes, signs, a written book, or something like that, so that you can remember what each building is. Signs are nice and easy because you can just attach them to whatever the project is, and you don't have to worry too much about remembering what the stuff in the written book corresponds to. But if you want to take more extensive notes, let's say, for example, this row of shops here, if I wanted to have a coffee shop on the corner here, the boutique for clothes, I want to have a bakery, and I want to have a bookshop. If I wanted more detail to each of those, more than is possible to write on a sign, I might get out a book and quill and just say bakery, cake in the windows, cookies further inside, bread on all the tables, like whatever else I can fit in that works from a Minecraft perspective. Likewise for the boutique, are we considering this armor trims and fashion, and is it all going to be leather armor, or is it going to be a variety of armor? Is the boutique actually for people who need to get dressed and go adventuring? But that adventurer's life is not necessarily something we have in real life, and so a boutique clothes shop in real life is going to be very different. It's going to focus more on fashion and just getting you the clothes that you need. This coffee shop here is going to be on the corner of this busy intersection, so are they going to have a hole in the wall where they would end up serving people from, or is it just going to be a sit down, grab a coffee, and then go kind of establishment? Well, I think either way, we can figure out something fun for the coffee shop, but I might also put a couple of other eateries and stuff around here closer to the center. I haven't decided what absolutely every shop is yet, but sometimes you might even want to have an idea for a shop before you lay that down, because part of the shop's character can come from the shape of the foundation. And if you really want to have something that's a unique shape, or a shape that suits what you're trying to sell there, or the impression that you're trying to give, then consider figuring that stuff out and getting a list of buildings that you want to build before you've even started this planning process and you're creating foundations and shapes for your builds. Hopefully some of that makes sense. It's starting to feel a bit like we're playing SimCity or City Skylines here, where we're planning out the roads and infrastructure and also figuring out where the buildings are going to go and how that makes sense for human habitation. But obviously this is going to be a project where at most we're going to move villagers in, although I have maybe some plans for a pillager outpost style thing over there that we can work on. Either way, we're going to leave it there, because I think even though I want to start building some of this stuff, I've got a lot more planning to do before we can really get on with that. So folks, thank you so much for watching this episode of the Minecraft Survival Guide. I really hope this has been helpful to you, because it's going to be immensely helpful to me figuring out the next steps for this project. Thank you so much for watching. My name has been Pixlriffs. Don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you folks soon. Take care. Bye for now.